On September 11, 2021, the United States of America came under a surprise attack. Two planes flew in the World Trade Centers, bringing them down. One plane flew into the Pentagon building, causing severe damage and killing many. One plane heading to Washington, D.C. towards the White House was downed by passengers in a field in Pennsylvania. The nation was shocked. They were rocked. Even to this day, many people ask why, what happened, where is God in all of this, what is the meaning behind this. The nation was not at physical war and people couldn't understand exactly what's going on. It was a sudden attack and a sudden blow. Have you ever encountered a sudden defeat based on a sudden attack on your life which you cannot understand why it happened and what is the cause and what is the reason for it? So it is in Psalm chapter 44, as we're going to be looking at the agony of defeat. Good morning, saints, and welcome to the Dixon's devotion. In today's devotion, we will be looking at Psalm chapter 44. Psalm chapter 44 is part of the Korahite collection written to the sons of Korah. As again, no one knows exactly who wrote this psalm, and the strong possibility is it is a son of Korah or a descendant of the Korahites. Now, Psalms chapter 44 have the same similar address as Psalms chapter 42. So in this psalm, as I said, we are not sure, commentators are not sure who wrote the psalm. There's no strong evidence to prove it was David, so we cannot be certain or say it was David. All we know that this psalm is part of the second section of the books of Psalm, book 2. And it was written during a time the author experienced a time of tragedy. The nation of Israel was defeated, and it was a sudden defeat. It was also an unexpected defeat. The nation of Israel could not understand what was going on. And as we look at this psalm, we are going to see also it mirrors our life. Sometimes we are going good, we are in tune with God, nothing is going, we cannot account of anything in our life that we are doing wrong. Then all of a sudden tragedy strikes and brought us to our knees, and we have to ask God why. We try to scratch our head, why this thing happened to us. We cannot figure it out. But before we go any further into the text, if you like the content on this YouTube channel, please remember to subscribe, like, comment, and tell a friend about our YouTube channel. So Psalm chapter 44 is a psalm of defeat. Some believe it was written during the time of Josiah, when there was peace in the land. Some believe it was written during the time of Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin. Some believe in the time of Zedekiah, when Judah went into final captivity in Babylon. Even some believe that it was during the time of the Maccabees, based on John Calvin, but we do not know exactly when this happens. But all we know, based on this, the sons of Korah, are the descendants of Korah, who were responsible for the music and also guarding the temple, wrote this psalm, and it was a psalm of lament and tragedy and asking God why. The nation could not understand why this happens to them. They could not figure it out. At this time, the nation was in tune with God. They was not serving idols, rebelling against God's laws, or any of that sort. So they were very much in shock when this sudden attack took place and brought them to their knees and caused defeat. This is why it is so difficult to pinpoint exactly when this battle took place. But all we know, it was during the time of spiritual height, not during the time of spiritual low in Israel. But God, by His divine providence and sovereign will, allow Israel to suffer this fatal defeat. And when we read the psalm, based on the psalm, there was no time that God intervened, because the psalmist is asking for God and praying for God's intervention. This is one of the occasions where we normally use the phrase, or we normally ask, why bad things happen to good people? And to be honest, sometimes there is no answer to that question from our human perspective. But when we look at it from God's end, we understand in His sovereignty, He is in control. And sometimes He allows certain things to happen. And at the end of the day, He will receive honor and glory. But sometimes we cannot understand it. Now, according to the MacArthur Study Bible study notes, the psalm is outlined in 3 sections. From verse 1 to verse 8 focuses on the past history, the shock of this national tragedy. From verses 9 to 22 focuses on current history, the inscrutability of this national tragedy. And from verses 23 to 26 focuses on future history, a prayer for an end to this national tragedy. According to Ellicott commentary, this psalm can be applicable to the family situation. It can be applicable to the national situation, and it can also be applicable to the church situation, where you can experience defeat in your personal life, in your civil life, and also in your religious life. Now let us get back into the word. In verse 1, the Bible said, reading from the New American Standard Version, "O God, we have heard with our ears. Our fathers has told us the work that you did in their days, in the days of old." Here the psalmist is saying, God, we heard about what you have done in the past. And this is in reference to God delivering the children of Israel from out of Egypt and defeating their enemies during the wilderness journey and also during the time of Joshua. And he's saying, we have heard. Now, the word heard here, in reality, in the Hebrew, is more related to something that is transcribed on a stone, like hieroglyphics. But yet later on, it was told to them. And that's how the Jews used to teach their people. They tell them the stories of what took place. So it was inscribed, but then it was told. So the author is saying, we remember, God, how you brought deliverance for our forefathers. From verse 1 to verse 8 describe how God brought victory to Israel from Egypt, even to Joshua in the land of Canaan, how God drive out the enemies. And he was saying, God, this is not because of our hands, it's because of you. It's not because of the boat that we have in our hands, it was because of you. In verse 2 it said, you with your own hands drove out the nations, then you planted them, you afflicted the peoples, then you spread them abroad. For by their own sword they did not possess the land, and their own arm did not save them, but your right hand and your arm and the light of your presence, for you favored them. You are my king, O God. Command victories for Jacob. Through you we will push back our adversaries. Through your name we will trample down those who raise up against us. For I will not trust in my bow, nor will my sword save me. But you have saved us from our adversaries. You have put to shame those who hate us. So right there we see that the psalmist is reflecting on the past, how God brought victory to Israel against their enemies, how God allowed them to push them back, how God allowed them to be defeated. The past, he's recounting the past. He said, God, you know, you did this to our forefathers. You caused this victory, but why now this sudden attack? Why now this sudden defeat? We cannot understand what is going on here. Now from verse 8 to verse 22, we are going to look at the current history, the defeat, what happened. He's describing now what happened, what is the meaning of all this, what is going on. So verse 8. In God we have boasted all day long, and we will give thanks to your name forever. Yet you have rejected us and brought us to dishonor. And do not go out with our enemies. You cause us to turn back from the adversary, and those who hate us have taken spoil for themselves. You give us as sheep to be eaten, and have scattered us among the nations. You sell your people cheaply, and have not profited by their sale. You make us a reproach to our neighbors, a scoffing and a derision to those around us. You make us a byword among the nations, a laughing stock among the peoples. All day long my dishonor is before me, and my humiliation has overwhelmed me, because of the voice of him who reproaches and reviles, because of the presence of the enemy and the avenger. All this has come upon us, but we have not forgotten you, and we have not dealt falsely with your covenant. Our heart has not turned back, our steps have not deviated from your way, yet you have crushed us in a place of jackals and covered us with the shadows of death. If we had forgotten the name of our God, or extended our hands to a strange God, would not God find this out? For he knows the secret of the heart. So here we can see The psalmist is giving us an example or describing to us what took place, how this sudden attack took place, and all the consequences of this attack. He said, God, you didn't go out to fight for us. Why? Verse 11, you gave us a sheep to be eaten. You scattered us among the nations. The people, the other surrounding nations scoff at us in verse 13. You make us a byword among the nation in verse 14. And we were a laughing stock all day long. My dishonor is before me and my humiliation has overwhelmed me. So he started to go down, verse 16, because of the voice of him who reproaches and revile, because of the presence of the enemy and the avenger. And verse 17, all these things come upon us, but we have not forgotten you. Lord, we didn't forget you when this happened. We were serving you. And we have not dealt falsely with your covenant. This is a time, as I said, the nation of Israel was in spiritual proximity or closeness with God. But yet this God allowed this tragedy to happen. Look at verse 18. Our heart have not turned back. Our step have not deviated from your ways. Yet you have crushed us in a place of jackals and covered us with the shadows of death. And verse 20, he said, look, if we had forgotten the name of our God or extended our hands to the strange God, would not God find this out? In other words, he's saying, we have not forgotten the name of our God. We didn't turn to other gods. We were not in idolatry. But yet God allowed this to happen. He's saying if we did that, God wouldn't find it out long time. God, you would have found out this long time. Why? And so it is in our Christian life. Sometimes we are serving God and then something sudden happen. Blessings fall on the just and also the unjust. And sometimes tragedy fall on the unjust and it falls on the just. Sometimes we cannot understand it. Even us as Christians, we are serving God. Then, bam! Sudden destruction. Some kind of bad news. A close family member die. Sometimes health situation. You went to the doctor. Then all of a sudden, you hear you have some tragic disease. Whether it be cancer. Whether it's something else. Something that strikes. That you want to know, why God, why? Some tragedy just happened. It happens to all of us. Yet God is in control. Yet God loves us. But yet, why? Certain things that we have no control over, then something happened. You're gone to the bank. Next thing you know, you're facing something that come into your life that cause financial crisis. What would you do? How would you respond? What would you say? Someone did something in your family that caused disgrace, shame, a child or something, get involved in the wrong company, do something that is bad and cause tragedy to you, your family, your name, your reputation. What is it? In the workplace, someone tried to bring you down, set you up and do something that ruin your name, your reputation. What is it? This is what the psalmist is all talking about. And he wants to know, God, look, I am served. This is not talking about someone out there who is doing something, rebelling or doing something bad or dishonoring or discrediting God's name. This is someone who is upholding and living a holy life. Then something happens. Ladies and gentlemen, these things happen. That's why this goes antithetical to the health and wealth, prosperity, gospel preachers. Not all the time good things, health and wealth is going to happen. This is just a part of life. The Christians will suffer defeat at times. But even because they suffer defeat, it does not mean God is not a part of it. Sometimes God allow it for a reason. Verse 21 says, would not God find this out? In other words, if we had gone to idols and different things, God would have already found it out. For he knows the secret of the heart. God knows. It's like a Job situation. Job serving God. He was the most righteous man in the east, the Bible said. Then there was a conversation between God and Satan, and God showed up. As a matter of fact, when you read it, God is the one who threw the challenge to Satan and allowed Satan to afflict his servant, to prove his sovereignty, and also to prove that Job will not neglect or turn from God, to prove to Satan the worth of his servant. And sometimes tragedy like this happen of a Job experience to prove our salt and to prove to the enemy that his servant will not turn from his ways. This is a Job experience from a national level. Job was individual. This one is national. But look at verse 22. But for your sake we are killed all the day long. We are considered as sheep to the slaughter. Now apparently the nation of Israel were being punished by other nations because of their testimony and their stance in God. Remember, Paul repeat this very verse in Romans chapter 8 to Christians, that all things work together for good for them that love the Lord according to his purpose. And he showed that as Christians we are going to be suffering. We, even according to God's purpose and will and plan, we around 8, 10, 11, we are still going to suffer affliction for God's sake. And here it is, the nation of Israel was suffering affliction for God's sake. And it's not because they weren't serving God, but because they were serving God. And they got this sudden attack, but God allowed it. And so it is, even though we go through all these affliction, we are counted as sheep for the slaughter, as in Romans chapter 8. Yet God said, none of these things will move my love from you. None of these things will turn my love from you. To us, we want to know, where is God? Is God love us? But God is saying, no, in all these things, nothing can separate my love from you. And here in the nation of Israel, even though God did not deliver them or give them an answer, one of the assurances that God's love is still with them. So the psalmist is saying here in verse 23, arouse yourself, why do you sleep, O Lord? Awake, do not reject us forever. Verse 24, why do you hide your face and forget our affliction and our oppression? For our soul has sunk down into the dust, our body cleave to the earth. Rise up, be our help, and redeem us for the sake of your loving kindness. So from verse 22, go down. Here is the plea. As I said, the focus on the future history, when the nation is seeking a national end to this tragedy. When they're crying out, God, now help us, redeem us for your name's sake. And it ends right there. Arise, God, we are bowed down low. We cleave to the earth. Rise up to be our help. Redeem us for the sake of your loving kindness. But it ends there. There is no answer. Sometimes in our life we go through things and God do not give us an answer. Remember in Job, Job couldn't understand his friends saying, it's something that these people done. Job, something that you do, and they accuse Job falsely. And so it is with Israel. There was a sudden attack, and there was nothing that the nation of Israel did. At this time, the nation of Israel were in tune with God. and God sent a tragedy, like how God allows Satan to afflict them, and God did not give an answer. Remember, Job said he want an adherence from God. God finally showed up, asked Job over 70 something questions, 71 questions. Job could not give an answer. Where were you, Job? Where were you do? In other words, I'm sovereign. I do what I want, when I want, and how I want. And sometimes that's how it is. And sometimes we go through these things, we cannot understand it. But at the end of the day, we have to trust God. Saints, sometimes there are things that we cannot understand on this side until we reach heaven. But all we know, we have to trust God. And whatever going on in our life, how tragic it might seem, remember, God has it, allow it for His glory and also for our ultimate good. Saints, have a wonderful day, and may the Lord's blessings be with you.